Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Petra Karlsson, and I would like to welcome all of you to this live broadcast with an international audience addressed by Helga Zepp-LaRouche. We have a broad international audience, and the webcast will be translated into German, French, Italian, and Spanish. And everybody are welcome to send in questions during the procedure, during the next couple of hours. We have dangerous, severe global crisis, but the potential for change in a good direction is also there. In the transatlantic region, we have the danger of immediate hyperinflation. You also have the breakdown of the physical economy that is escalating day by day. Now, on top of that, the situation in Southwest Asia and North Africa is really dramatically turning into something that could quickly lead to a third world war, and that with thermonuclear weapons. Now, many people ask themselves what they can do. How is it possible for me as a single individual to actually intervene into this situation? And I don't know anyone better to address and answer exactly these questions than Helga Zepp-LaRouche herself. She is not only the chairwoman of the German party BÜSO, the civil rights movement in Germany, but she is also the president of the International Schiller Institute. And she has organized for the last 3 or 4 decades internationally for the project Eurasian Land Bridge. She has organized more than hundreds of conferences in Europe, in Asia, internationally, with governmental officials, with diplomats, with professors, people from different institutions. She has also revived the classical tradition in Germany of the German classics. She has in depth studied the great thinker Nicholas of Cusa and also the philosopher Friedrich Schiller. So without further ado, Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Thank you. Hello, good evening, and good day. We are holding this international webcast to generate an international debate about the situation that there is an alternative to the present policies. And I want to call at this occasion to all the viewers to mobilize for the realization of this alternative, which I'm going to present to you today. What we face as a human civilization is this. We are threatened with the immediate danger of a thermonuclear war, a third world war. If you look in the Middle East, Southwest Asia region, day by day, the tensions around Syria are escalating. There could be a possible attack on Iran by Israel and possibly the United States. Even this is a big fight around the events of the Benghazi American consulates and the growing anti-Western demonstrations around the release of this blasphemic video. Now, the events in Benghazi, the killing of the US Ambassador Stevenson, has been called by Lyndon LaRouche, my husband, a September 11 number 2. Now, if you look at this situation as a totality, it is very clear that the Balkans, that the Middle East has become a new Balkans, where only one more incident could trigger a chain of reactions which could lead to a thermonuclear war on a global scale. If this would happen, it would for sure mean the extinction of civilization. Now, this is not unrelated to the fact that we are in the final phase of the collapse of the financial system of the transatlantic region. Right now, both the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve have started a process of hyperinflationary printing of money. And this is threatening that this entire transatlantic region will have very shortly a hyperinflation like it happened in Germany in 1923. Now, if you look at these two combined and interrelated dangers, we have a situation where it is very clear civilization is about to crash against the wall. And we have to have an immediate paradigm shift, and we have to mobilize all possible forces to accomplish that. Now, if you look at the situation in Southwest Asia, it is comparable to the Balkans before World War I, because you have an evolution of conflicts and alliances which tend to have a chain reaction character, and they are almost already out of control. You can say that maybe only one more trigger would be necessary, and the thing is leading to a catastrophe. There is a danger of an Israeli strike against Iran, possibly before the US elections. There are numerous scenarios circulating about a possible breakaway ally scenario where Israel would do something and then draw the United States into it. Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly insisted in the recent period that Iran is about 6 to 7 months away from having the nuclear bomb. Now, that is highly debated. For example, the former director of one of the former directors of the German National Intelligence, BND, Hans-Dieter Hermann, just recently said that their estimate is that Iran will only have enough nuclear enriched material by the spring of 2013, but then it would take them another 6 months to produce an actual bomb. And that Iran is presently not pursuing a nuclear bomb, but that they want to have a nuclear weapon capability, which is a big difference. Now, if then Iran would leave the nuclear proliferation treaty, they would like to be very rapidly in a position to build a bomb. Now, that's a completely different situation than what is claimed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that is also confirmed by the umbrella organization of all US intelligence services, the NIE, who recently confirmed again that they are convinced that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear program, which it discontinued in 2003. Now, there is basically also a massive argument by the US military and even Israeli military and secret service former heads and present heads that you can negotiate with Iran, and that also it would be very counterproductive to try to take out the nuclear capacities of Iran, because the blowback would be uncalculable. It would possibly only delay an Iranian program, but then after such an attack, Iran could not be stopped to develop these nuclear weapons. There was recently a report by several retired military and diplomats, among them Scowcroft, Edward Zinni, and others, who warned very strongly against a military strike, and basically saying that this could last to a many year long war. But such calculations are also sometimes not so predictable, because at the same time there was a war game exercise done by the Saban Center of Mideast Policies of the Brookings Institute, which was reported by David Ignatius yesterday in the Washington Post, which said that any such war could go out of control because the tendency is to misread the signals of the other side, and the potential for a complete escalation obviously is extremely there. Now, this war against Iran, against Syria, would already have happened if it would not have been for the mobilization efforts for war avoidance, especially by Mr. Larouche, my husband, who warned against the danger of a thermonuclear war coming out of this as early as early November last year, and the head of the Joint Chief of Staff of the US military, General Dempsey, and other American military, who basically have tried to intervene many times. Now, the war against Libya and the killing of Gaddafi is part of this policy of regime change of the British Empire, of which unfortunately the present administration has become a part. This is a policy would have already continued against Syria and Iran, and ultimately it is targeting Russia and China. Now, General Dempsey recently intervened again and said that he does not want to be complicit in an attack against Iran, to which Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately said that he got calls from many leaders in the world warning him how dangerous such an attack would be, but that he thinks not to attack would be more dangerous. Now, the military and ex-secret services in Israel are warning that if such an attack would occur, it would put the entire region into flames for 100 years or more to come. Well, it could be that this conflict is almost already out of control. You already have a clash of civilization going on, a war between the Sunni and the Shiites, a war between the Muslims and the Christians, which is all steered by the policies in the final analysis of the British Empire. And what comes to mind at this point is a quote by Friedrich Schiller from his Wallenstein trilogy, the Piccolomini part, Act 5, Scene 1, that it is the curse of the evil deed, that it permanently must regenerate new evil deeds. And where this applies, in my view, is what happened at the Trilateral Commission meeting in 1975 in Tokyo, where not only it was decided to have a policy of the so-called, quote, controlled disintegration of the world economy, a conscious deindustrialization, post-industrial utopian scheme, which was part of the paradigm which is responsible for the present collapse of the transatlantic region. But what was also decided at that point was the policy of the Islamic card against the Soviet Union in the war against Afghanistan. And this led to the creation and support of the Mujahideen in the 10 years from the 80s, leading to the final end or contributing to the end of the Soviet Union. Now, the situation in Afghanistan presently is as lost, if not more lost, for the war partners as it was for the Soviet Union in 1990. Senator McCain, after Republican Congressman Bill Young, the Chair House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense Chairman, is calling for the immediate withdrawal of US and NATO troops from Afghanistan. McCain said, in light of the killings of US soldiers by trainees, the discontinuation of the training and patrolling, there is no reason to stay. There should be an orderly retreat now. The situation in Afghanistan is completely hopeless. And if you look at the unnecessary death of many soldiers, you can only say this was a terrible war which should never have started. Then you look at the situation in Syria. As part of the regime change policy to overthrow President Assad, who after all is the head of a secular state where you had the peaceful coexistence of all religions, Now, all of a sudden, as part of this regime change policy, he became the dangerous dictator. Now, the German Foreign Minister Westerwelle even expelled the Syrian ambassador, and this despite the fact that it was clear from the beginning, and the proof is that we stated so, and also Mideast experts like Mr. Schollatur and others. It was clear from the beginning that the so-called opposition in Syria was financed and supported by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar, by Libyan mercenaries, by Al-Qaeda forces coming from Iraq. And so, you know, when President Putin a short while ago said, well, why don't they just open the prison of Guantanamo, release all the prisoners, arm them and send them to support the rebels in Syria, he hit the nail on the point, because these are the same people the United States is fighting war against in Afghanistan, allied with in Syria, and you know, who in all likelihood had a hand in the killing of the US ambassador in Benghazi. Now, if this policy is coherent, I don't know what is not. Now, the assassination of US Ambassador Stevenson in Benghazi, it was officially said by the Obama administration, was supposed to be the result of a big demonstration getting out of control as a result of protest against this video. But that was absolutely not true. This video, by the way, is a blasphemic piece of filth which is disgusting, but it had nothing to do with the murder of Ambassador Stevenson. Now, the official American line, promoted in the beginning by President Obama, by Susan Rice, and also Hillary Clinton, was clearly not the full story. And now The Guardian and other papers are having many more details than what Hillary Clinton yesterday presented in a hearing in the Senate. The president of Libya basically, and the police locally, said this had nothing to do with the video, but this was a pre-planned action to do something on the anniversary of September 11th. These were people who came in from Mali, from Algeria, 4 weeks before. And then, when there was a hearing in the Senate, Senator Susan Collins contradicted this official line by saying that she got a classified hearing, that the whole thing was pre-planned to occur on 11th September. And that basically, you know, she was totally horrified that there were no Marines to protect the compound, that security had been outsourced to a private British firm linked to the SAS Blue Mountains. And therefore, the whole thing looks a little bit different altogether. And this is why Mr. LaRouche called it September 11 #2. Now, to shed light on what is really going on, it is very useful to look at a book published by Senator Bob Graham already some time ago, who used to be the US Select Committee on Intelligence, and he chaired the September 11 Joint Congressional Commission on US Intelligence Failures. This book, which has the title Intelligence Matters, the CIA, the FBI, Saudi Arabia, and the Failure of the American War on Terrorism, he expresses his view that the two presidents, George W. Bush and Obama, willfully covered up the role of Saudi Arabia, the royal family, and the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate in the September 11th attacks. That there was a cover-up involving US law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and what angers him particularly is a 28-page chapter of this report, which is still classified. It was classified by President Bush, which pertains to the role of the Saudis, and in particular the former ambassador Prince Bandar bin Sultan in the financing of the attacks. This Prince Bandar, by the way, is today the head of intelligence of Saudi Arabia, and therefore probably not unrelated to what is happening in the region. Now, Senator Graham reportedly tried several times to convince President Obama to declassify this 28-page chapter, which Obama also had promised to the families of the victims of the Twin Tower attack during the election campaign. Now, in these 28 pages, there are also references to the role of the FBI and a possible multi-level cover-up of their involvement in various Saudi operations in the United States, helping and training and financing the hijackers and the pilots of the planes. And for this, just past September 11th, Senator Graham wrote an op-ed in the Huffington Post where he says that the mistrust in the official story of what happened on the September 11th, who financed it and who supported it, is still a matter of national security today, because these networks are still in place, and what the joint inquiry had learned and what has emerged since shows where the proverbial finger of suspicion points. It points to Saudi Arabia, and we need to know the full truth, wrote Senator Graham. Now, the killing of Ambassador Stevenson, September 11th, number 2, was also the issue of a press conference given yesterday by Congressman Walter Jones, Colonel Wilkerson, Bruce Fein, and basically they made very strongly the point that the killing of the ambassador was also the result of the illegal war against Libya and the killing of Gaddafi. Now, the implication of the thesis of Bob Graham are enormous because, well, the war against Afghanistan would not have happened if that thesis would have been investigated, because the Afghanistan war was called for based on Article 5 of NATO. So this war needs to be reinvestigated and ended because it was ill-defined from the beginning. Just yesterday, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Churkin, made a warning saying that the discussion within NATO to maintain permanent military bases in Afghanistan after the soldiers have been withdrawn are very strange and suspicious. He said, if the war on terrorism is winding down in Afghanistan, yet continued military presence is supposed to be there, then the bases are preserved for some other task that is not linked to Afghanistan. And then he also demanded that there must be a report given to the UN Security Council on the results of the existing mandate, and that the mandate only could be continued after a vote and a discussion in the UN Security Council. Now, what other task could the maintenance of military bases in Afghanistan after a withdrawal possibly have? Well, the answer is world empire. Because the real target of all of these developments is Russia and China, who obviously are not part of the British Empire or the Anglo-American British-dominated empire. And therefore, one has to look at the strategic picture as a whole to actually see what is happening. You have the American missile defense system in Eastern Europe, which Obama had promised he would review, but now he's continuing with the policies of President Bush. Now, this Russia totally objects to, understandably, because once this system would be built, it would eliminate the second strike capability of Russia and therefore completely change the strategic balance of nuclear weapons and would equal a capitulation de facto of Russia. Now, the statements by General Staff Chief Makarov that the continuation of the building of this missile system could lead to the use of nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe better be taken serious and not be dismissed as for internal use, as it has been poo-pooed by some people. Because you have to see it together with the encirclement of China, which was escalated by President Obama in his recent trip to Asia end of last year. Japan right now is discussing the abandonment of Article 9 of its constitution, which is part of it. And there is basically a continuous, or there are many new alliances which have only one aim, encirclement of China. Now, there are very serious efforts right now by the US and the Russian military to have a war avoidance policy. But, you know, it is not clear if this will be enough given what is going on. Right now, there is a big maneuver involving 25 nations in the Strait of Hormuz. There just concluded a Russian strategic command post exercise called Kavkaz 2012, which was presided over by Joint Chief of Staff Makarov, and which is aimed, among other things, or was aimed at the protection of the southern flank, which obviously would be heavily targeted and involved if there would be an Iranian attack on Iran. Now, if it would come to an escalation in the Middle East, the possibility that it not only would lead to the use of one nuclear weapon, but it is the nature of the war, of danger of war with thermonuclear weapon, that they would be used fully, and that would be the extinction of civilization. Now, Hiroshima, the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima, was a 15-kiloton bomb. One Trident II missile has 8 W-88 warheads, which have 253 times the power of the little boy bomb of Hiroshima. First clip, please. Now, this is the wrong clip. Can you please take the second clip? Yes, here you see pictures of maneuvers, which could be those in the Strait of Hormuz. This would be the launching of such a nuclear missile, the blast, a nuclear explosion, the following fire blades forming conditions of complete destruction. Then in the aftermath of that, clouds would prevent the sun to reach the earth. The temperature would probably drop by 7 degrees. You would have a nuclear winter, and there would be probably no human beings and no other species alive after such a blast. Now, this is the immediate danger. This thing could go out of control. And the problem is that this has been building up for a very, very long time. I mean, these deployments and putting into place of capabilities are not something sudden, but this has been building up. The Cold War mentality continued to exist long after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But the timing of the immediate danger does have eminently to do with the fact that we are seeing now the end phase of the collapse of the transatlantic region, of the Eurozone, but also the dollar zone. You have right now de facto the limitless injection of liquidity in the financial system. for Germany and for Europe and for the world, one can say the date of the September 12th may turn out to be a very fatal date, because this is the day when the Karlsruhe Constitutional Court in Germany basically gave the green light for the European Stability Mechanism, a terrible construction which would give the banking system an unlimited dictatorship if it ever starts to function. They gave the green light for it to go ahead with two small provisions, namely that the German representative in the ESM Governing Council and the German Parliament have to agree if the German contribution in the ESM is supposed to be increased. But that is no reason for consolement, given the fact that Mr. Schäuble is known to want to rush to a United States of Europe in some form as quickly as he can and transfer all sovereignty to the Brussels bureaucracy. And the record of the German Parliament in the recent period is basically that they often did not even read the documentation on which they were voting. Now, in a certain sense, even the ESM decision is terrible. It has been already made obsolete by a similar decision by the European Central Bank 6 days earlier, where they decided that they would from now on limitless buy state bonds of countries in trouble of the Eurozone. Now, this quantitative easing also was announced by Bernanke and the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is presently putting approximately 85 billion per month new liquidity into the system. Now, this is hyperinflationary. Everybody who is not a complete believer in the present predatory system knows that. And I must praise the chairman of the German Bundesbank, Jens Weidmann, who has been standing up in a very courageous way as the only opposing voice in the European Central Bank board. And he recently basically made a huge attack on the EZB by saying an argument which we have said many times, that money as such does not have any value. It's just paper with a print on it. And then, which is laudable for a chief of the Bundesbank, used a literary reference, namely from Goethe's Faust, Part 2, where Mephisto in the story makes a deal with the bankrupt emperor, promising him limitless money. And first it seems to help, but then soon the resulting inflation is destroying the financial system and the state. And Goethe, which is also interesting, describes the creation of inflationary money as a continuation of the policy of alchemy, where people tried to make gold out of lead. In modern times, it's the same thing when you are trying to make money out of paper or out of electronics, because nowadays, you can push the delete button in a computer and all this virtual money would disappear without much consequence. Now, Weidmann basically said the method by central banks to create money out of nothing is something mystical, almost dreamlike, but maybe more nightmare-like. Weidmann then said that the central bankers manage a public good, and therefore they need to justify themselves publicly. And then he called for a public debate on the policy of the European Central Bank. And that was also an announcement by the Karlsruhe Constitutional Court that they will hold a hearing in a few weeks on the policy and role of the European Central Bank. Now, the reason why this issue is especially hot in Germany is because we had the experience of the hyperinflation in 1923. And we all have, from stories from our families or from studying history books, the experience that hyperinflation is the most brutal form of expropriation. When people think they have a life saving, they have a secured pension, they have some money in the bank for their old days, well, then soon you realize you have to pay whatever you thought your life work was for one piece of bread, because that's what happened in 1923. Now today there are approximately maybe 1.5 to 2 quadrillion outstanding derivative contracts there. Maybe more, because nobody knows, because there is no transparency, you have the shadow banking, but we are talking about quadrillions. Now if you try to refinance that, as it has been happening essentially since 2007, but especially since 2008, through one bailout package after the other, you end up with that kind of hyperinflation, except this time not in one country, but in the entire transatlantic region. Now, in Germany, there is a huge fear about that, and there are now, even in the mainstream media, tons of articles appearing which were the 56 worst hyperinflations in history. Now, number one was Hungary between August 45 and July 1946, where you had 207% daily inflation. During the French Revolution, you had 204% per month. In 1923, which was one of the five worst inflations, a daily inflation of 20.9%, and every 4 days the doubling of the price. In the end, many people used the paper money coming as money from the printer to fire their stove directly, because it would be more efficient than to buy wood, which would have doubled its price, and therefore people burned it directly. And after the whole thing was over in December 1923, people used these money notes as wallpaper, because it was the cheapest paper to be had. Now, Zimbabwe in 2008, a daily inflation of 98%. Every 25 hours the price was doubling. And even the banks, Deutsche Bank and others, are now saying, oh yes, the price for saving the euro is inflation. Now, what is not yet settled is how fast this will happen and how quick. Well, I can tell you, very fast. Can we see, please, the triple curve? Because what you have is, while you have this tremendous inflation in the financial aggregates, this is the upper green curve, you have a complete collapse of the physical economy, which is the downward directed blue curve. For example, in Italy, the annual collapse of industrial production right now is minus 7.5%. Spain, minus 4.4%, 5.4%. Greece, minus 5.3%. In July, however, minus 7.8%. France, minus 3.3%. And even Germany, who is supposed to pay for all of this, had a shrinkage of its industrial production of 1.7%. The worst figure is the collapse of the durable consumer goods in Italy by 10%, and that is also directly the result of Mario Monti's property tax for real estate, which means now households cannot buy any more cars or domestic appliances, TVs, and so forth. Now, the central bankers are doing this obviously without having any respect for the effect on the social life, on the economy, because the real economy is collapsing at a very fast rate. The Greek economy has contracted since 2008 by 25%. This will be until the end of next year, according to official data. This has led to a complete desperation. The suicide rates have gone up. The reduction of life expectancy. In essence, there are no more hospitals where children can be treated for heart problems. In Spain, the youth unemployment is by now 55% average. In Andalusia, 70%. For many children in Spain, the only kind of meal they get is the one meal they get financed by the school. So the so-called success story of Portugal, which was long hailed by the EU as fulfilling all the austerity policies of the Troika, they had now, over the weekend, last weekend, a mass demonstration of 1 million people in the streets of Portugal in 40 cities, and people were yelling, "Hunger, hunger." Now, the fury of desperation obviously is especially strong among the young generation, which under these circumstances has no future in their own country nor in the rest of Europe. Now, for Portugal, a small country, 1 million people in the street, that is the equivalent as if you would have 30 million in the street in the United States. And just remember, the 1 million march in Washington was a little bit more than 1 million, or at most 2 million. Now, the situation for the young people in Portugal, Spain, most of Italy, Greece, but also increasingly many other countries is just horrible. There is no perspective. With the programs of the EU right now, young people in Portugal and Spain go on the street and say, what are we supposed to be? A country of waiters, only living from tourism? Now, this thing will explode in this coming weeks. In Spain, for the 25th of September, they have announced the next major action, calling on to surround the parliament, take it over. There is a call by the Public Power Corporation Labour Union on their fellow unionists to bring Greece also to a standstill, to force the government to abandon the presently implemented austerity measures. They also call for taking over the ministries and public buildings. The Spanish Bishop of the Armed Forces, Januario Torgal, warned this government will leave streets behind which will be covered by corpses. Now, in light of this, the proposal of so-called economist Stiglitz that Spain should stay in the euro because the price of leaving it would be too high can only be regarded as utterly incompetent. The idea of creating a banking union, which he also advertises, and mutualization of the debt is also hyperinflationary. And then he blames Germany of being responsible for the present crisis. Now, I can only reject this entirely because the German population is equally the victim of this present policy. More to the point was Argentine President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, who in August reminded people of a speech of her late husband, Nestor Kirchner, in front of the UN General Assembly in 2003, who warned at the time that the dead cannot pay their debt. Now, we are today in Europe at a point which reminds you of Friedrich Schiller's remarks in Don Carlos, where Marquis von Posa accuses Prince Philip that his policy for Spain is only bringing the peace of a graveyard. Now, that is the danger of all of Europe. Now, all these proposals which are on the table right now, the European Stability Mechanism as a permanent bailout fund, a banking union, a mutualization of the debt, Eurobonds, a United States of Europe, all of this will not function because simply there is no European people. We have minimum 27 nations, 27 histories, languages, and nobody in Europe, except of a minor bureaucracy and some people who profit from the present system, do regard themselves as a European nation. We are not. This again is the curse of the evil deed which permanently gives rebirth to more evil. Namely, when the euro was enforced on Europe, especially on Germany, as a price for German unification. And it was the geopolitical aim to turn Europe into the junior partner of the Anglo-American Empire at the time. And remember that Amato, who was one of the architects of the Lisbon Treaty, or rather the reformulation of the European Constitution to become only a treaty because it was flatly voted no by the French and the Dutch populations, had actually said, why not go back to the Middle Ages? You know, feudalism was such a beautiful thing. And that is exactly what the present policy of the EU represents. Now, this is not acceptable. And the alternative does exist. It is easy, relatively easy, but it requires the political will. What needs to be done as an absolute first step is the reintroduction of Glass-Steagall in the tradition of Franklin D. Roosevelt. A complete separation of the banks, commercial banks and investment banks, and the commercial banks have to be put under the state protection to be able to give credits to the real economy. The investment banks must bring their books in order without having access to the assets of the commercial banks or being financed by taxpayer money. If they have to close their books or close their bank, well, that is too bad, but not a disaster. Now, the next step has to be, and Glass-Steagall right now is fortunately everywhere in discussion. There is the Capture bill in the United States. There is a debate in almost every European country for Glass-Steagall, and therefore it could be put on the table immediately. And we have to fight for it. And I'm asking all of you viewers, fight for the implementation of Glass-Steagall, preferably this month, because this is the best war avoidance policy you can have. Secondly, we have to cancel all the EU treaties from Maastricht to Lisbon. Now, the argument that this would be a disaster is a complete concoction. Peter Bofinger, one of the five wise guys, today has an article in Die Welt saying a return to the D-Mark would be a catastrophe. Now, I doubt that Mr. Bofinger is really competent to judge that, because until very recently he did not even acknowledge that we have a systemic crisis of the system. And why should you listen to economists who did not foresee the crisis concerning their advice what should be done now? Now, Europe existed and functioned very well before the Maastricht Treaty. And we need to have sovereignty over our own currency. We need to have a new D-Mark, a new Drachme, a new Lira, etc. Simply because that is the only way how countries can fulfill, and how states and governments can fulfill their oath to protect the common good. Now, we need, and fortunately the Karlsruhe ruling from the 12th of September, the last paragraph had a clear reference to which international laws apply in case a country wants to leave the European Monetary Union and return to their national control over currency and economy. Then we need, as part of this package, an immediate implementation of fixed exchange rates. Now, this is important because we have to prevent speculators like George Soros to make billions in a week by speculating against the life work or work of decades of nations. Then we need to have a credit system. We have to replace the present bankrupt monetary system with a credit system in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton, the National Bank he created, or also the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau in the reconstruction of Germany, which after all used the principles of Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation to turn Germany in a few years from a rubble field into the famous German economic miracle. Now, a credit system is something contrary to a monetarist system where you create money to pay debt, old debt of the past. In a credit system, the state issues credit towards future production. And in every case where this has been done internationally, like in the Franklin D. Roosevelt period, like in the post-war reconstruction of Germany, it can be proven that because of the impulse to the primary and secondary impulse to the real economy, the tax revenue after a few years is always much higher than the initial credit given. And that has everything to do with the power of human labor to create more wealth, to generate added value, to implement the results of scientific and technological progress in the form of technology which increases the productivity in the production process. And therefore, this kind of money generation is not inflationary. It is not the same kind of money creation like what is being done by the central banks right now. Now, this was done by Roosevelt. This is how he got the United States out of the Depression. And in Germany, in the beginning of the 30s, there were similar proposals, the famous Lautenbach Plan, which was more or less the same like Roosevelt's New Deal. There was a plan by the General Trade Union Organization, the ADGB, which was called the WTB plan. All of these plans basically said the state has to create credit to eliminate unemployment, to create productive jobs, and basically by providing for productive full employment, you eliminate the conditions of the crisis and you eliminate the cost of unemployment, you generate the wealth for sustained maintenance of society. Unfortunately, as we know, the Lautenbach plan and the WTB plan were not implemented. If they had been implemented in 1931, in 1933, the conditions which allowed Hitler to come to power would have been eliminated. So we better learn the lesson of this now and turn away from the utterly disgusting Brüning policy of austerity which is being implemented by the Troika right now. Now, the concrete focus of such a change in the financial system is a plan which we have presented a couple of months ago. It's called the Plan for the Reconstruction of the Southern Europe, the Mediterranean and Africa. Now, can we have that clip, please? Now, this is the World Land Bridge. This is an idea which we have proposed since the collapse of the Soviet Union, which has been expanded into a worldwide connection of infrastructure projects, of large water management projects like Nawapa, like the Transaqua system. And it would basically mean to provide the entire world with the necessary infrastructure, which presently only some countries enjoy, like Germany, which has a very well functioning infrastructure. Now, this is the extension into the Balkans. This is connecting the Rhine-Main-Donau water system of Europe with canals and river systems to the Mediterranean. It means building some of the, this is now the connection of the bridge of Messina between Italy and Sicily, and then a tunnel between Sicily and Tunisia, where a tunnel will be built with 5 artificial islands, so that basically you could connect the European transport system with Africa. Another very important project is the connection of the street through tunnel under the Strait of Gibraltar, and this is the so-called Africa Pass, connecting the water, the amounts of water from the Congo region through a channel system all the way to the Mediterranean, where you could develop agriculture, where presently is only desert. And in connection with the Transaqua project, this would begin to transform Africa completely, eliminate hunger and starvation and diseases in a very short period of time. Now, this project, can you please just have a still picture of the World Land Bridge? This project for Europe, for Southern Europe, the Mediterranean and Africa is not all that revolutionary. Some parts of it are, like a science driver component by building a space station in the Canary Island, by having a science center in Essence. But most of the projects, including the development corridors into the Balkans, into the south of Italy, into the Iberian Peninsula, are all projects which were already agreed upon by the EU transport ministers at a conference in Crete in 1994. They decided on 10 priority corridors, which 5 of this would have gone into the Balkans, into Greece, others into Italy and Spain and Portugal. And they essentially, except very tiny components of it, have never been built, mainly because of the crisis which then erupted and the austerity programs, but also because there was this paradigm shift very much to the green ideology, which is right now controlling the guidelines of the European Union. Now, this program we presented in another webcast earlier. You can find it here in the archive on this webpage. So I do not want to repeat all the arguments from that. You also find the written report, which we are translating right now into all relevant languages. But this program could be started tomorrow. It would give a vision for Spain, for Portugal, for Italy, for the Mediterranean, for Africa, and it would absolutely change the entire dynamic. But I have to say one provision. You cannot be intimidated by the green ideology, because how can you survive as a country if you don't produce anything? How can you survive without having a perspective for the young generation and the generations which come after that? Now, the green paradigm is part of the present oligarchical model, which unfortunately has been imposed in the form of the EU on Europe, and it has the idea of reducing the population. It is absolutely not consistent with the real laws of the universe, and the proof of that is that the Royal Society in their annual report this year openly said that they want to reduce the world population to 1.5 billion people. Now, the green paradigm, which was introduced as part of the global paradigm shift at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, like the thesis of the Club of Rome, that the world has now reached a limit, that you have to have limits of resources. Because you have supposedly limits of resources, you have to have sustainable development, appropriate technology, all code words for no technology, does not correspond to the real universe. The real universe is an anti-entropic developing universe, which always provides for new resources, provided man is using his creative power to determine, through scientific and technological progress, what are the new resources. Now, the world population right now is 7 billion people. And, well, I mean, we could easily feed these people and many more. There are many projects to, make life better on this planet. Now, do you think that the condition of Africa is a natural phenomenon? Do you think it is like that because the people in Africa do not want to develop? No, the aim of the oligarchy is to reduce the world population to 1 or 2 billion people, as Prince Philip has said many times, as many other people like Schellenhuber in Germany, who wants to have a 1 billion population. And they want to turn Europe into a feudal society. I already mentioned Amato, who has basically praised the Middle Ages, but I think that that is not the road to go, because this will lead to a terrible, terrible social explosion this month, next month, and the collapse of society. Now, we have provided the outlines of a recovery program, because it is not enough to be against the austerity imposed by the Troika right now. But we have to have a positive vision of what we want Europe to look like. I want to have a Europe of sovereign nation states, of a revival of the high periods of classical culture, like the ancient Greek classical culture, like the Andalusian Renaissance in Spain, like the Italian Renaissance of the 15th century, and use that high level, or the German classical period, and use that to create something new for all of mankind. And I'm calling upon everybody who is watching this webcast to help us to mobilize for that mission. Because I think all which is necessary right now is to inspire the population that such an alternative exists. Now, we have to do a couple of other things. We have to change the paradigm of thinking completely. Because if we stay in the present paradigm of present geopolitical politics, of the transatlantic region, of the programmed conflict with Russia and China, it is very clear civilization is probably going the way the dinosaurs went approximately 65 million years ago. There are fortunately thinking people who realize that we need to change something. And I want to mention the Euro-Atlantic Security Initiative, EASY, which has been presented this February of this year by former Senator Sam Nunn, the present head of the Munich Security Conference, Wolfgang Ischinger, and the Russian Igor Ivanov, because they obviously also realize that the present Cold War thinking is having the explosive potential for a catastrophe. They denounce this Cold War thinking. They call for an inclusive, undivided, functioning Euro-Atlantic security community where all disputes should be solved by diplomatic, legal, or other non-violent means, without ever the recourse to military force. They also want to have a demilitarization of the relation between the United States, NATO, and Russia. And they say that if such a treaty or alliance would be adopted, this would be a complete game changer. And indeed, that is what we need, a game changer. But even better and even more reaching into the future is another proposal which was presented by the former Russian ambassador to NATO, Rogozin, who is now one of the vice prime ministers, who made the proposal of the so-called strategic defense of the Earth. Now, this is a conception of collaboration among nations of the world, very much an extension and in the tradition of the SDI proposal, which my husband made and which President Reagan announced as the official American policy in 1983. Now, what this focuses on is, among other things, the very much live and existing danger of a serious asteroid impact which could be as devastating to civilization as a nuclear war. And those people who think that this is esoteric and why should I be concerned about comets and asteroids, you better go to the web pages of NASA and of the ESA and look that there are indeed many, many such asteroids with a trajectory either towards Earth or maybe towards Earth, and that there is right now a massive increase of such activity which has to do with the cyclical developments of the position of our planet in the galaxy. Therefore, the idea that one does not have to prepare for this possibility of an impact is a dangerous folly. Now, can we go back to the pictures? First, the asteroid comet size statistics. No, the statistics. Yes. Now here you see what is the impact of asteroids or comets. For example, if you have an asteroid of 30-meter diameter, this would be a minor damage relatively. 50-meter diameter already would be comparable to the largest thermonuclear weapon in existence. But if you go to the possibility of a comet of 10,000 meter diameter, this would have energy released of 80 million megatons TNT, and that would be the complete extinction of the human species. Now, such things did happen in the past. If you look at the so-called Tunguska event, which happened in 1908, and it hit an area of 2,150 square kilometers in Siberia. And on the right side, you see the equivalent area if such an impact would occur in New York City. It would eliminate quite an area. Now, please have the comparison of the Mount Everest and such an asteroid. Now here you can see Mount Everest having 8,848 kilometers, and compared to one large asteroid of 10,000 kilometers. I mean, just imagine if Mount Everest would hit with a velocity of many kilometers, it would blast the Earth out of the water. Now look at the last 500 million years. Now this has happened repeatedly, and it many times was related to the so-called big extinctions, the last which occurred approximately 65 million years ago, where up to 98% of all species got eliminated. So I mean, this is a very real danger, and presently we are, as a civilization, not equipped to do anything about it. But if we have the ambition to be smarter than the dinosaurs, we better start to invest massively in manned space travel, in the kind of research which would enable us to detect the trajectory of such objects. And, well, I mean, basically, therefore, the proposal of the SDE should be put on the table for serious. Now, this all requires a complete change in the self-conception of man. We have to stop being infants. We have to stop thinking that we should have geopolitical wars for raw materials, for power, for all kinds of things. And we have to make that jump to concentrate on the common aims of mankind instead. Now, this involves the common mastery of new scientific principles, we have to consciously start the next phase of the evolution of mankind. If you go to the writings of the German former scientist, later American German scientist Kraft Ericke, who called manned space travel the absolutely necessary next phase of evolution of mankind. That life developed out of the oceans on the planet, on the ground, then man conquered the planet through infrastructure development, and now manned space travel is the next phase of the evolution of mankind. And in order to make sure that civilization will be an eternal civilization and not have the same fate like previous species which got wiped out, we better start to rethink who man is in the universe. Kraft Ericke, who was a dear friend of mine and of our organization, used to call it the extraterrestrial imperative, meaning that man consciously starts to explore the galaxy, consciously becomes rational by only acting on scientific principle and not on popular opinion or other such positivist conceptions. And I think we have come a big step closer to this point with the absolutely exciting landing of the Mars rover Curiosity, where now basically the first step of mankind into the near galaxy has been accomplished, because now not only was the first voice human voice to be heard from Mars in the form of a transmission of the commander of the space station on Earth, but we have now senses. We can hear, see, smell on Mars, but with a difference of about 14 minutes and transmitted by the speed of light. So the Curiosity landing gives you a pre-taste of where mankind can go, that we indeed are at the beginning of a new epoch. Now, Kraft Ericke, who was a fantastic human being, also said, and he was one of the leading space scientists, he said, despite the fact that he developed the Saturn rocket of the Apollo project and many other things, he said a technology is never good or bad. It is always man who either brings this technology for a good purpose or for an evil one. And therefore, towards the end of his life, he agreed with us in saying that the aesthetical education of man must go along with the scientific development. Now, I totally believe that that is possible, and that if we do that, then not only can we deter the present dangers, but we can start a new phase of mankind. Now, the reason why I'm, despite all the existing dangers, so optimistic that it is possible has to do with the thinking of such people as Nicolaus of Cues and Johannes Kepler, who Johannes Kepler, while studying the stars, came to the conclusion that the universe is so full of beauty that it clearly reflects in its lawfulness a loving creator, and that if we do our job right now and act in the image of that creator, I think that we have reached a punctum saliens in mankind's history where we can make the jump so that mankind finally can become adult.
Thank you very much, Helga. I need to make one little correction. We doesn't have translation into Italian, unfortunately, but we make sure we will do it the next time. We have got questions from South America, from Russia, different nations in Europe, and I will start with a question concerning the war danger, because it's a question that has come up from different people, different institutions. This one comes from Austria. Every war no matter how dangerous it is always big business for some people. But who would gain from a thermonuclear war? With hyperinflation, economic collapse, and thermonuclear war, civilization would for sure go extinct. So who would actually benefit from that?
Well, in the final analysis, nobody. But if you look in the history of previous wars, especially world wars of the 20th century, one has to also realize that not one big war ended as the planners had thought about it. It is the very nature of war that they have a tendency to go out of control, to have secondary and tertiary blowback effects which the original designers did not take into account. And I must say that the very existence of these nuclear arsenals, that they are being deployed in exercises, that there is presently what can only be called as a thermonuclear chicken game, where obviously the portraying of such power is being done to intimidate the potential opponent to capitulate. For example, take the case of Syria right now. You have right now in Syria the immediate clash of the so-called Blair doctrine with the Putin doctrine. Tony Blair, who has been convicted as a war criminal in some countries, who can probably not travel to other countries because he may be arrested, where Bishop Tutu has basically said this should be pursued, who has given us the lies which led to the Iraq war. This same Tony Blair, who is presently advising the election campaign of President Obama, has made a speech in 1999 in Chicago, where he basically proclaimed the end of the era of the Peace of Westphalia, that the respect for the sovereignty of nation states could no longer be the basis of policy, and that you had to have a policy of humanitarian intervention to protect democracy, human rights, and so forth and so on. Now, obviously, has been adopted also by the US administration. It's the so-called Atrocity Prevention Board. It is what is guiding the policies against Syria right now. But there it clashes immediately with the so-called Putin doctrine, which President Putin has reiterated when he became again president of Russia, by saying that it is the Russian policy to uphold the principle of the UN Charter, of the absolute non-violation of the sovereignty of nations. And, you know, President Medvedev at a conference in St. Petersburg a couple of months ago even said that, you know, if this is not respected, it could even lead to the use of nuclear weapons if, you know, this UN Charter is not respected. Now, this is obviously the problem, that as long as the empire is trying to become a world empire, this danger exists. And I think that there is a other component why people do these things. Now, as I said, to have maneuvers where, you know, basically only 10% or even less of all existing thermonuclear weapons being exercised would be enough to extinct civilization is a crime against humanity already there, because the danger of an accidental launch, the danger of some ship, fisher ship, colliding with some ship, I mean, all of these things have happened many times, or the possibility of a provocation, some kind of Agadir or Tonkin or other incident, all of these things have happened in history. I think it should not be. These maneuvers are completely a relic of the past, and the fact that some people are playing with it has to do with the fact that the present British Empire is run by people who say, okay, even if there would be an elimination of a couple of billion people, that may be not so bad, as Bertrand Russell said after the Second World War. And I think that that is a fact of policy, because why would these things happen if that was not so? So I think that what is necessary is to immediately have a public debate about in what kind of mortal danger civilization exists, and then put the alternatives on the table, such as the easy proposal I mentioned, such as the SDE proposal, and a new Glass-Steagall World Land Bridge reconstruction proposal for the world. If we do that, we can overcome the danger, and we can put the question of nuclear war, or even war as such, as a relic of the past behind it. But to accomplish that, we need you. We need a mobilization on all levels. We need a civil discussion in the parliaments, in the mayorships, in the city councils, in city town meetings. We need to warn the population about this danger and that the alternatives exist.
Thank you very much, Helge. You have almost already answered many of the questions coming in. The next two ones are both from Russia. The first one is from Alexander Nagorny, deputy editor of the Russian weekly newspaper Zavtra. And he's asking, my question is, what might be the time frame and the parameters of inflation in the United States and Europe? What should be the political consequences of this for the international community and the world community? So the question is the time frame into hyperinflation. The second one concerning Glass-Steagall. And the second one is from Mikhail Kazin, Russian economist, who is also a frequent commenter on Channel 1 TV and The Voice of Russia. I have the following question. Well over a decade has passed since Clinton bowed to the request of his friends and abolished the Glass-Steagall law. During that interval of time, the sheer volume of world finances has really mushroomed, and if similar laws were to be reintroduced now, the entire world financial system could collapse. In the view of the LaRouche school, what can be done about this?
Well, as I already mentioned, the ESM, even if it would go into effect, which is still held up by some legal suits, and there are a flood of new legal suits being prepared also against the EZB, but if it would go into effect, the ESM as it is conceived right now is already too small. Because if you need to have so-called rescue packages for Spain, then Italy would follow, then you soon are at the French banks. And one of the reasons why the French are making such enormous pressure on Germany to go for all of these schemes is because the French banks are about the most bankrupt of all. So in order to refinance this, you would go into a hyperinflationary process probably in the next weeks and months. Inflation is already visible in the form of commodity prices, real estate, gasoline, energy, but basically you could have a complete explosion like it happened in 1923, because if you remember, in 1923 you already had almost 4 years of money printing on the side of the Reichsbank, because the Versailles conditions imposed on Germany meant that Germany had to print more money than the German economy could possibly compensate for. But only after the French troops had occupied the Rhineland and production came to a standstill as a result of the opposition of the German population, only then, from spring to November 1923, it exploded. Today we have a similar process, not in one country, but we have it in the entire Eurozone and in all of the dollar zone. So therefore, this could go much quicker. And since the dollar is not just a currency for the United States, it would affect naturally every country and would lead to a general collapse and outbreak of chaos. Now, what would be the social consequences if people realize that hyperinflation is on? Well, the EU and even the British government, they have made contingency plan for the evacuation of British citizens, if there would be such a collapse. So it's short term. I cannot tell you exactly how many weeks, but it's already on. The hyperinflation is on. Bankers like Deutsche Bank bankers and others are already saying, there will be a rather big inflation, but that is the price we have to pay. Others even peddle the line that inflation would be good because it would reduce the debt. Now, this is expropriation of the population, and therefore it would just, it would not eliminate the dangers of war and general collapse. Now, concerning Glass-Steagall, well, that is absolutely true. If you impose Glass-Steagall right now in the United States and in Europe, you would wipe out a large part of this virtual money which has been created through derivatives, through structured papers, through securitization, through all these creative financial instruments, which were the result of the deregulation already under Greenspan in the 90s, but especially after the repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999. You would have to write off most of this paper. And as the former economic minister of Italy, Tremonti, has pointed out, people would not really lose anything because they would only write off something which existed only virtually before. So people naturally are opposed to this because they say, but I have all these structured papers and I have this and that. But it does not exist. It does not have a real value in terms of the real economy. So therefore, when you impose Glass-Steagall and you protect the commercial banks, you have not enough credit. You have not enough money, not enough liquidity. And this is why you have to combine Glass-Steagall with the concept of national banking, of Alexander Hamilton, of, as I said, Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, principles after the Second World War in Germany. And you have to have a credit system where the sovereign power of the state to issue credit for the common good towards future production, for productive investment, that has to be put on the agenda. Now, this is, I know, a big problem because people who have been thinking in Europe and elsewhere in terms of monetarist categories, they have a real mental block to understand that. They somehow cannot make the jump. They say, yeah, but if you issue credit, then that is inflationary. Or what is the difference between what the central banks are doing now and your credit system? Now, the difference is absolutely fundamental because, as I mentioned, the liquidity published right now is entirely for past accumulation of debt, outstanding derivatives, outstanding accumulation of things from the past. If a sovereign state says, I have the following manpower, with the following investments in well-defined programs and projects of physical economy, I will cause productive full employment. Productive full employment means an increase in the productivity of the labor force and the industrial capacity by applying the newest results of scientific progress and the principles of increase of energy flux density in the production process. Because you want to increase the productivity by making investments in those areas which are necessary for the long-term survivability of civilization, and that does require an increase in energy flux density. Now, if you obey these principles of physical economy, then a credit is not inflationary, because you issue that credit with a low interest rate and you don't expect a return after a month, not like Ackermann wanted to have 25% returns. You have to say goodbye to that idea. You issue the credit for 10 years, for 20 years, as long as it is needed to fulfill the project you have designed. Now, if you have international cooperation among nations, let's say for the World Land Bridge, then you make multinational long-term credit arrangements among all participating countries, and you also balance the differences among the countries. Like, for example, some countries are very huge, like Russia, many time zones, relatively few people as a population. Then you have other countries, very small, many people, like Belgium. Then you have other countries who have monocultures, others have, so you have a diversity of conditions, and you have to have a network of multinational treaty arrangements where the aim is to increase the productivity of the labor force of the respective populations, and then you increase the buying power over a long period of time, and you change the entire way how people think about that. Now, I would say that we need this debate in all countries. In Germany, we have the precedent of the reconstruction of the post-war period, where the Marshall Plan, so-called, was being implemented by the Kreditanstalt according to these principles. Roosevelt did it with the New Deal. And I think in Russia, I know that there is a very competent economist who has written about that, Sergei Glaziev, that the state has the right to issue credit towards production, and that is what is the sovereign right of a nation. Now, therefore, when you want to realize these large projects, I think it would be a complete mistake to think that you need foreign investment of some offshore bankers to invest in this, but it must be the sovereign power of the government and of the state to do these investments for the common good. Now, if that is being done, there would be naturally a period where a certain change would have to occur. And the population probably would be anxious of what that means. Like currency reserves in Germany has a very bad name. But I think that right now the much, much bigger danger is what we are facing through the combination of war going out of control in the Middle East and hyperinflation. Because if you have more or less global hyperinflation, you have social chaos beyond belief. If, on the other side, the responsible governments of the world work together and say, we have a plan how we get the mankind out of this mess, here is what we are going to do, then I think, it can be done, and the people who have by now, at least in Western Europe, this is the case, and I think in the United States as well, lost a lot of trust in their governments. And that is a very dangerous condition as it is, because if you have a complete divide between the mass of the population and their governments, this also forebodes big dangers for the future. So I think we should have an international debate, public conferences, TV programs presenting these ideas, and get the population very rapidly accustomed to the idea that we do have an alternative. Because all of this talk about there is no alternative is just totally ridiculous and irresponsible, because it is the creativity of men always to be able to come up with alternatives. And, there is only one thing which has no alternative, and that is death. Everything else has an alternative. So let's just be human and implement them before it's too late.
Thanks, Helga. I think Professor Ganoulis from UNESCO got his question answered by the answer Helga just gave, but I will read the question anyway. Professor Ganoulis from UNESCO, Chair for Sustainable Water Development, is asking. He's from Thessaloniki in Greece. I agree that the Glass-Steagall law for banks must be re-established, along with the necessity of building canals and development corridors as the model for a new Marshall Plan for Greece and the Mediterranean. However, my question is, why is it necessary to abolish the euro for that and not use the EU existing monetary union in order to reverse the existing policy to achieve our common goal with a common currency and stop the policy of austerity and misery in South Europe? I think you already answered it, Helga, but I ask another question that goes together with it, and another question after that. This is also from Greece, and it's from Herr Protogerakis, excuse my pronunciation, journalist and TV producer. What kind of advantages would Greece have from the Glass-Steagall? And what kind of alternatives are existing, especially for Greece? So there's many questions about the question of currency and national banking. So feel free, Helga, to maybe develop it more. But I have another follow-up question to it from Germany. The bank separation is a very big issue in the media now, but one hardly finds anyone in economic science at the universities that actually know how to deal with the problem, or within the younger generations, the students. Many people are not familiar with it, even if they have heard the name Glass-Steagall or Trendbankensystem. If one wants to look into the theme of productive credit, one simply has to know a bit of a history, like the German post-war economic miracle or the Roosevelt era. But these have become almost exotic items in the curriculum today. Why, Mrs. Sepp LaRouche, do you think things has come so far, and what can be done to change the situation?
Well, I think the question of why we need to get rid of the euro, I'm not saying that some distant time in the future we could not have a European currency. But the problem is the euro was misconceived from the beginning simply because it was clear that you had not an optimal, so-called optimal currency zone in Europe, because the different structure of, let's say, the German economy, the northern Italian economy, the Greek economy, the Portuguese economy, simply meant that, you know, in the 10 or 11 years since the introduction of the euro, the fact that you had the same interest rates meant a so-called boom in the so-called coming up countries, like the southern European countries, which turned out to have been a bubble. The so-called boom was a real estate boom in Spain, a tourism bubble in Greece, and the real productivity of the population was not developed. Now, I'm not excluding the possibility that sometimes in the very distant future you could go to a common currency, but a common currency requires also a common people, and there I see the biggest problem, because the whole conception of a United States of Europe does not really function. And you know, if, for example, if you go to the people in Slovakia and you ask them what do they know about people in Catalonia, or you ask people in Denmark what they know about people in, let's say, Brittany, and I could make this list longer. I mean, we in Germany do not know what's going on internally in France. There is not a common public. You have 27 languages, 27 nations, 27 histories. And, if you don't have one people, it's not like the United States. The United States is united through one history, one language, one culture. And therefore, it does not make a big difference if somebody takes a job from the East Coast, changes to the West Coast. It's one country. But if you tell a young Greek person to go to Finland and take a job there, you already have a language problem. It's just not the same thing. And I think that, that is not a problem, because we can be a united Europe with a common mission of development of Africa, for example, or common space travel, as an alliance of sovereign nation states. I think just today is the anniversary of the Élysée Treaty between de Gaulle and Adenauer, and I think their conception of a Europe of the fatherlands, where perfectly sovereign nations are working together for a common aim and a common good, can happen. We do not need a supranational bureaucracy, and we do not really need a common currency, because if we go to the kind of credit system I was outlining just before, there is not going to be this kind of, that we as a European empire, so says Cooper, the advisor of Lady Ashton, have to protect ourselves against rising big powers, China, India, Brazil, United States, Russia. We will only get out of this crisis if we go to the new paradigm. And in the new paradigm, other principles, other axioms have to govern what we do, or we will not get out of this crisis anyway. So therefore, I think we are not losing anything with the euro, but you need sovereign control over the own currency and the own economic policy, because that is the only way how you can protect the common good of your own people. Supranational structures do not function, as we have seen with the EU right now. Now, also the argument that it would be so catastrophic, for example, for Germany to go back to the D-Mark, it's just not true. Sure, the new D-Mark would be, in all likelihood, upvalued, but as long as Germany remains to be a producer of new discoveries of science and technology, German products have been bought for their machine tool value and not because of their price difference. And therefore this argument is completely fraudulent. Now, the advantages of Glass-Steagall for Greece, I think that they are the same like for every other country, that you would have a credit system and a banking system where the entire purpose of the bank is to serve the industry. I mean, why should you have a banking system where investment bankers, who, as far as I know, are not so productive in terms of real economy, why should they have boni of hundreds of millions of euro or dollar or whatnot? They should go back to be the servants of industry, like Hermann Abs used to say in the post-war period. There is no reason to have a banking class which is, the top, and then all the others are below. I think we need to reverse that, and banking is a service sector and not a thing in itself. Now, concerning the condition of the economic science, there you indeed put your finger on a real wound, because there is right now in Germany, and I guess in other countries as well, a huge debate among different economists, the Austrian school, the Chicago school, and all kinds of schools. But none of them addresses the real issue, that almost everything which is being taught in terms of economy in the universities today is monetarism. When you go and study either Volkswirtschaft, Macroeconomics or Microeconomics, Betriebswirtschaft, what you study is how to play the markets, the future markets, how to sell derivative contracts, how to play within this game of globalization. You can ask the students, and unfortunately also the professors, have you ever read anything by Gottfried Leibniz about physical economy? I give you a bet that 99.9% chance that they never did that, at least not as a curriculum. You ask them, did you ever read anything about Colbert, mercantilism, about Friedrich List, about Henry Carey? Did you study how it was the recognition of Bismarck, Chancellor Bismarck, of the teachings of Henry Carey, which turned Germany from a feudal state, believing in free trade, into one of the most industrial nations of the planet? Well, that is not being taught. However, that would be a key lesson, you know, if any country wants to get out of a feudal condition into an industrialized age. So, you know, I think what we need to do is to have an initiative of people to go back to those periods where successful models were applied, like the New Deal, Glass-Steagall, Pecora Commission. When this financial crisis erupted in 2007 and 2008, we tried to propose to the parliaments in Europe to implement a Pecora Commission. This is exactly what Franklin D. Roosevelt did after 1933, when he investigated what was the criminal element in the crash of 29 into the Depression until 33. And the Pecora Commission, under the leadership of Pecora, investigated the crimes of the Wall Street bosses. Several of them had to go to jail. And Glass-Steagall was simply the consequence out of the findings of this approach. Now today you have a situation where this financial crisis is now more than 5 years since the end of July 2007. And despite of the fact that you had the LIBOR scandal, where it now turns out that the largest banks were manipulating the interest rate over decades, cheating their clients for hundreds of billions of dollars, have these people gone to jail? Not yet. Maybe some will. But despite the fact that you had the Hong Sheng Banking Corporation, you know, in the U.S. Congress hearing, proven to have laundered the large part of the money from the Mexico drug cartels, I have not heard that these people have already been criminally prosecuted. Maybe they will. But you need to clean the system. You absolutely need to have principles applied in the past, like Pecora Commission, like Glass-Steagall, New Deal, and these things have to be studied. And I think we need to define a new curriculum for the universities where the principles of physical economy, especially as they have been advanced by my husband Lyndon LaRouche, should be the curriculum in universities, especially also because it is a proven record that he is probably the only economist who has an absolutely undebatable record in having been able to predict this crisis, to give prognosis at every branching point when the change was made away from production towards speculation. He said this will have the following consequences. If you continue on this road, then this will happen. Now he predicted, he made the first forecast in 1956. The second one, big one, was when Nixon abandoned the old Bretton Woods system. He was absolutely on the mark concerning all the different steps, the 87 crisis, especially his webcast from the 25th of July from 2007, where he said this system is finished, it's over, all we will see now is how the different aspects will come to the surface. And measure that to all these other economists who are now so plentiful with their proposals, they were all wrong. So why would you listen to somebody who was wrong all the time and think that all of a sudden they come up with the right idea? I think we need to study physical economy, and frankly, I think my husband deserves the economic Nobel Prize, except that that prize has been so discredited because of the many people who got it already that he may not even want it. But he definitely has an undebatable record.
Good. I tend to agree, even if I'm from Sweden. The next question, Helga, is coming in from Ireland, from Jean Douglas. Following the Karlsruhe verdict, a Brussels-based magazine described the decision as passing the hat onto Ireland. The reference was to the ongoing legal challenge to the ESM treaty by the Irish Independent Deputy Thomas Pringle, which decided as the last-ditch defense against the monstrous dictatorship which is engulfing Europe. Having been referred by the Irish Supreme Court, the case is now in the highest court within our legal system and cannot be appealed any further. So this ruling will be decisive. We would like to ask you for your thoughts on this case. Do you think that the European Court of Justice could rule in the favor of Deputy Pringle, thus putting a halt to the would-be dictators and the hyperinflationary process that the ESM represents, right at the very last minute?
Well, as an optimist, I even would assume that a snowball can survive in hell. But in this case, I'm doubtful, because as the 5 professors who have sued repeatedly against the euro and other things in front of Karlsruhe have stated, there has been not one case where this European court has voted against anything going in the direction of more integration of Europe. So therefore, the chances that they, as you say, at this very last moment will block this, I think, is really not very big. I think the more it should be pursued, however, absolutely also to test this court. But I think the more promising road to go is really a general mobilization of the population. I think that we need to have a public hearing about the EZB. I'm very happy that Karlsruhe will do that. I think it's very good that also now Bundesbank head Weidmann is calling for a public debate about the EZB, because since they are managing public money, they also have to have public scrutiny. That's a very sound and good principle. But, I mean, I'm not discouraging in any way Mr. Pringle to pursue this. But on the record of the European Court, I think the chances that they will overturn this, I don't think is very big. I think the much more important thing is to mobilize the population and mobilize them for the alternative, of which then, Glass-Steagall, return to national currency are all part of the same package. And without the whole package, you will not get out of this crisis. We are long beyond the point where you can only have a single issue addressed. This is also the problem with the people who are now fighting the ESM. What they're doing is laudable, except it does not solve the problem. You have to have a comprehensive proposal how to get mankind as a whole out of this mess.
We have an interesting question from Austria that I think really goes to the root of the problem, and also the discussion we have had concerning the Euro nation states. The question is as follows: the party system in Europe seems to be the root of corruption. And Leonard LaRouche has mentioned the problem with the party system in his later speeches. But is a society without parties really possible? And if so, what kind of structure and how would the society be organized otherwise?
Well, I think the European parliamentarian system of parties is really not functioning because, I mean, for example, I describe it in the case of Germany, which I'm most familiar with. The parties which are in the parliament have something which is called faction discipline. So when the individual parliamentarians have to vote, they cannot fulfill the basic law, which according to Article 38 says that the parliamentarian is only accountable to his own conscience. The party rule or the party system, the faction discipline, means that this parliamentarian has to vote in such a way that, you know, this discipline is being fulfilled. And in many discussions I had over the last years, you find a parliamentarian who is a decent human being, who has good principles, but then comes the point where in the discussion he says, oh yeah, I would really like to be for the common good, but not to the point where it ruins my career. If I do what you are proposing, then I will not be nominated for my election district the next time around. And therefore, you know, I can talk in private about this, but I cannot act on it. And that is how the whole thing has gone down. That's how all these atrocious decisions concerning the Lisbon Treaty, concerning the European Stability Mechanism, and all these other things have come about, where the faction discipline is simply preventing, and people have, you know, also their compartmentalization in their thinking. They are not even trying to get on top of the issues. They are not even reading the documents they are voting on. In the case of the Lisbon Treaty, we have clearly had a situation where the vast majority of the parliamentarians did not read what they voted for. So all of this is really bad, and the party, or you have, you know, a crisis like that. For example, we are saying we have the danger of a thermonuclear war erupting out of the Middle East. Then you talk to a person and says, yeah, I agree, but I cannot really you know, discuss with the people from the other party because, you know, he's not from my club, or he does not come from the same barn I'm coming from. So people are not discussing national issues, issues which are of the existential survivability of their nation, simply because they belong to a different party. I mean, this is absolutely does not make any sense. So, you know, I asked actually my husband, I said, but what do you do if you have no parties? I mean, how do you organize the population? And obviously, you know, you need to have a truly representative system, as it was designed in the American Constitution, a system which actually comes originally from Nicolaus of Cues, who in the Concordancia Catholica in the 15th century developed this sort for the first time, a representative system where the representative is in a reciprocal relationship to the governing on the one side and to the governed. And he has to mediate the interest of the state and the interest of the citizen in a reciprocal way. Now, so you need these representatives, but these representatives must be elected in a different way than through the parties. And the way you do that is you have a mission orientation. You have a debate in the public about what is necessary to secure the future of the nation and of civilization at large. And then you inspire the population to get the best possible ideas on the table, and then the people who are both the wisest and who have at the same time the highest respect for the law and who are the ones who can carry that mission, those people should be elected. Now, I think this is possible. Why should it not be possible? This is the idea Plato had with the philosopher king. These are ideas which Nicolaus of Cus had in terms of that only the wisest and most law-respecting people should be the governing. And, I think it is a complete contradiction to the present misery of mediocrity which is characterizing the European governments and parliaments, where people have no knowledge in science, or very few people do not, portray deep knowledge about culture, but are just, political profis who manage things. And, if you look alone at the level, how it came down from such giants like de Gaulle and Adenauer to the present day, I think you see where the perpetuation of this party system is leading to. A big nivellation in the lowest possible denominator. So we need a debate about creativity, about excellence, about mission, about inspiration of the population. And I think we can get out of this.
Good. You are one step ahead of me, Helga, somehow with the questions all the time. We have a couple of questions coming in from Italy, also from Germany, concerning the culture in the society. We have from Italy a radio show host from Milan. He has been campaigning for Glass-Steagall the last year and has been interviewing parliamentarians in Italy concerning the Glass-Steagall. But his question goes more to, why are not more people on the streets? Why are not more people politically active themselves? And he's saying, people seem to lack the vision and sense of imagination necessary to look for alternatives. Is it because of today's culture is just too pessimistic? Is it because people today are dominated by the senses and only care about pleasure, vacation, the latest iPhone, Twitter, and they lack the sense of imagination needed to fight for a better world? How can we change their thinking? Then a similar question that goes in the same direction is from Germany. How can all those great men who fought for the nation state but were killed by the oligarchy, such as John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Enrico Mattei, Ponto, Bubac, be replaced as we need them today? How can we find them in short time? And how can we create a different culture and a different political situation? I would just add to that last question that we have, first of all, Helga Zepp-LaRouche today, but I'm sure she can develop the answer more.
Well, concerning the first question, I don't think it's the pessimism of the culture. I think it is the fact that we in Europe are living under an oligarchical system. Now, most people have not thought about that, but when you ask them, and we do this many times, every day having information tables in the streets, and then you tell people, look, this is what we have to do. And then the answer, which comes almost in 98% of all cases, people say, one cannot do anything anyway. And then, I tend to ask people, they said, okay, if you think that, in what kind of a system are you then living? Are you living in a democracy? Well, maybe not. Maybe we are not living in a democracy. And, I think that is the first step to realize that the way the EU is organized right now as a supranational bureaucracy, where the individual person with a party system where you either fulfill the party discipline or you don't make a career, with a system where indeed the ability of the normal person to even have an informed view about things is being hampered by the fact that you have a media control where the mainstream media is, and I'm saying this in full consciousness of what I'm saying, is as controlled as it was during Goebbels' times. I mean, this is a word from a CDU editor from a major newspaper in Germany who told me that this is his view. And I, as a former journalist, one is never quite a former journalist, I also know that from the inside that the media control defines what is newsworthy, what will never reach the public eye, what are accepted discussions. I give you one example. Yesterday I attended the press conference in Washington by Congressman Walter Jones. And there were Walter Jones, Colonel Wilkerson, the former chief of staff of Colin Powell. There was the former deputy attorney general of President Reagan, Bruce Fein, another person, Colonel Schäfer, and they made the most beautiful, compassionate speeches about the danger of war, about the need to defend the Constitution, about the famous Walter Jones bill, HCR 107, which requires the president to go to Congress before he declares war. And I can only advise you, I mean, these things will be on the web pages everywhere, and you could hear the most dramatic and powerful Republicans speak in the tradition of the real America, of the American founding fathers, of the need to uphold the Constitution, and why it is absolutely disgusting that the United States today does the same policies like they were done by George III and the British Empire against which the American Revolution was fought. Now, this was a very, very important event, but do you think one mainstream media would have been there? None. And that is how it goes. When the non-aligned movement in 1976 at their annual conference in Colombo, Sri Lanka, had adopted a program for a just new world economic order, which was absolutely in cohesion with the proposal of Lyndon LaRouche for an IDB, an International Development Bank, to replace the IMF. I called up the chief, the officer of the day of DPA, the German press agency, and I said, "When are you finally bringing this?" He said, "Oh, we are not bringing this. This is not newsworthy." I said, "What? 85% of the human race just decided to have a just new world economic order, and you say this is not newsworthy?" He said, "No, that's not what we bring." And this is how it goes. Really important issues which do not fit the interest of the oligarchy, they just don't report about. Now, obviously, one could argue that in the times of the internet, people have access to other sources and so forth. But the problem with the internet is if you don't have already a good educated mind, you don't know what you're looking for. The internet is wonderful if you know what you are looking for and searching. But that's not the case with most people who are flooded with information. They don't really know how to put it together and make an analysis. And therefore, you know, this is really a problem. And therefore, I think those so-called alternative radio hosts, the people who have alternative websites and so forth, I think we have to link our efforts, you know, much more and really make sure the population is being educated very, very quickly. Now, I think we are in a period where sudden changes will come. In the United States, people have reported that the killing of the US ambassador in Benghazi already created a little Pearl Harbor effect. Pearl Harbor was the event where, according to eyewitnesses, in 2 hours, a population changed its view completely. Yeah. And I think that with the things I presented in the beginning, we are in such a period where you can expect sudden changes in the view of the people, where people suddenly will reject opinions they had dearly just the minute before, because they recognize that there is a break between the ideology they believed in up to this moment and the reality which is asserting itself. And it's this kind of a period where we have to intervene with our conceptions, because there are long periods in history where indeed it is almost impossible to change something. But then come those moments which we call, or I call, the star hours of history. Such a moment was the break of the coming down of the wall in November 1989. At that point, we could have changed history for the better. We had a plan, the productive triangle, which later became the World Land Bridge. And we could have used this historic chance to change history. Unfortunately, at that point, the oligarchical faction of the old Bush administration decided to go for the empire-building regime change together with the British. So that chance was lost. But I think we will come now again in a period where it is clear that the old paradigm is not working. And what we have to do is to prepare people as quickly as possible that there is an alternative. And that is why I wanted to have this webcast, because we have the reconstruction program for Southern Europe, the Mediterranean and Africa, the World Land Bridge, the EASY proposal, the SDE proposal. And I think that that is what we have to force on the table and get a public debate. And then I think we can do a miracle. Now, how we find courageous men and women, I think there are some. I think we have to encourage those who have dropped out of politics, who are sitting in their science laboratories, in their orchestras, in their other places, and tell them to step forward. Because I know that there are a lot of good people in the trade unions, in the middle-level industries, and we just have to evoke that spirit of the population to try to save civilization before it's too late. And I think if we are lucky, we can do it.
So we have unfortunately come to the end. This is the last question. It's from a member of parliament in Armenia, Babu Kanyan. He took part of a TV debate in Armenia recently, and he was asked the question of Armenia's future, if it would be with Russia or together with the European Union. He said in the debate he himself put forward the idea that these two options should not be counterposed against each other, because there exists higher level of cooperation for the different nations together. So he doesn't necessarily have a question concerning this. He's mentioning the Eurasian land bridge. But I think this is the direction we need to develop. So I would ask you, Helga, to comment on the last statement, we can say, the common aims of mankind for the future.
Well, I think that alliances of nations must always reflect the self-interest of that nation. Now, I think just the alliance with the EU as such as it is right now, I think why would you join something which is collapsing? Because the EU is a failed model, and I think that does not mean it's a failed Europe, because the statement by Mrs. Merkel that if the euro fails, then the EU fails and Europe fails, that is just not true. I think that we have a very, very good perspective if we go in the direction I outlined earlier. But then I would really look more in the direction of a Eurasian Union, because if we want to have that kind of demilitarization of the relationship between the United States, NATO and Russia, if we want to have the SDE proposal on the table, if we want to have the building of the World Land Bridge, then I think we need to have a completely different kind of understanding of an alliance of sovereign nation states. And I'm thinking more that the model for this would be what John Quincy Adams presented when he said that we need to have an alliance of perfectly sovereign nation states working together for the common aims of civilization. And I think that that is the model of the future, and not only for Eurasia, but also for the relationship between Europe and Africa, the relationship with Latin America, and just organize ourselves in a different way. I think we need to do a lot of activity. I think we need to inspire the people. I think we need to have a public debate about great projects transforming the planet, transforming the deserts of the world, transforming Africa, turn Africa into a blooming agriculture, gardens, forests, new cities, have architects study great universal architecture, to build new cities which are beautiful. We don't need to have ugly new Houstons. I don't want to have new cities which are all made of glass and concrete. We need to have the beautiful architecture of the palaces of the Maharajas, the Chinese temples, the Golden Renaissance buildings, Schinkel designs in Germany. There are so many beautiful architectural heritages which we all must develop and revive and develop further. I think we have to really start thinking about the future in a serious way. If mankind is going to survive, we definitely need to have more such operations like the Curiosity expedition, not only to Mars. We have to have new cities in the Arctic. The Russian government is planning to build this Umka city, which could be a model for the kind of space stations, which we need to develop the industrialization of the moon. We have to terraforest the Mars so that eventually people probably can live there. We have to have a completely different view about the role of man in the universe. Now, I think that if we combine that with the idea of a new scientific and cultural renaissance reviving classical culture, I'm absolutely sure that within a few years, maybe decades, we will reach a situation where people will be so happy to be scientists, to be classical artists, that they will forget that there was ever a period where they were greedy for money or for power, or all of these things. Because once people taste the sweetness of truth, the sweetness of creativity, they will never go back to the kind of degenerate life which people have basically been living as a vast majority in our period. Now, I think that we are at an end of an epoch. Nicolaus of Cues, when he wrote the Doctor Ignorantia and other writings, was very conscious that he, with his writings, was beginning a new epoch of mankind. That the Middle Age of the Aristotelian, peripatetic, scholastic teachings, that was over, and that he was reviving a new thinking as it was never thought before. And I think that that is what we need to do today, and organize the relationship among nations for these things, looking into the stars, being happy that we are human, being happy that we have everything still to discover, that we are only at the very, very beginning of the development of mankind. And if we start to really have a vision of how the future must be, because it must be a human future, then I think we can solve any problem on the planet. And we will, make sure that we can jump into a domain which only very few people have an inkling of what that can be. So inspire your compatriots, inspire the people who want to have a good future for Armenia, and join together with like-minded people in all other countries and have an alliance of creative people across all nations, and then we can do it.
Thank you very much, Helga. I think everybody has got the ammunition needed. The time is short. It's very urgent. Be creative. Bring all the ideas with you into heart. Contact parliamentarians, governments, institutions. And again, I would just say thank you so much, Helga.